Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I am talking about the episode from Season 2, The Braggart. The Braggart introduces the character of Hobie Shanks, who was a young man, a boy actually at one point, that the Waltons fostered for a period of time from the county boys' home. He's now all grown up and is coming back to the mountain because he has an opportunity to be seen by a baseball scout to potentially get a contract pitching for the major leagues. I'm very happy to have Michael McGreevey joining me today to talk about what it was like doing the Waltons and playing the character of Hobie. Now, Michael McGreevey is the son of John McGreevey, who wrote numerous episodes of the Waltons, and Michael also went on to write some episodes of the Waltons.
The Braggart, Hobie Shanks, Hobart Hobie Shanks, probably one of my favorite characters that I ever got to play, because on the surface he's just a braggart, but underneath he's a much more complex person, and actors love to have a three-dimensional character to play. I think the writer, Richard Fielder, probably modeled Hobie Shanks after a famous baseball player for the St. Louis Cardinals in the Depression era named Dizzy Dean. Dizzy was a great pitcher, but he was also a bit of a braggart. The other thing is I had a close friend who was a bit of a braggart, and I think I incorporated quite a bit of my friend into the character, because I knew the other side of my friend, that he was probably insecure and really not that sure about himself, and that's why he was such a braggart. My memories of the shoot are all very positive. Jack Shea, the director, who I sat down with early on and said, I'm worried I'm going to be too big and over the top, and he said, I'll tell you when you are, and that's basically what he did for the whole week. The welcoming cast, sometimes when you guest star in these series, especially a series that had just won all these Emmys and was this huge hit, because this was the second season, you don't feel welcome, but I was welcomed immediately by Ralph Waite and by Richard, and by the rest of the cast, because that's my other memory. The first scene we shot was the dinner table scene.
Dealing with these eating scenes. In this case, Hobie is referred to as the world's greatest eater. Mary Ellen, who of course is completely enamored of baseball, having had her catcher's mitt and playing baseball with G.W. Haynes. And she's also quite fascinated by Hobie himself, who she considers the cutest thing ever.
I had all this dialogue, and I didn't know anybody, and I was terrified. And the cast, the dinner table scenes had become chaotic already for them, because they all had to sit there, and they were not being very polite, I must say, at one point. And Ralph I guess he did that a lot. Ralph Waite said, hey, this kid's doing good stuff here. Let him do it, And from that moment on, I sort of relaxed into the role. And the rest of the week was really fun, and I made some good friends who I still see, like Judy, and the whole experience was a very positive one for me. I will share one funny story. That first morning when I arrived, I came out of makeup, and as I walked towards the set, I was greeted by Richard Thomas and welcoming me to the show and blah, 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 followed by Ralph Waite saying basically the same thing. And then Ellen Corby, Grandma, approached me and introduced herself, and I said, gee, I've been such an admirer of your work. And she said, yes. And she said, this is a hell of a role you've got here. And I said, yeah. And she said, yeah, well, I hope you're up to it. Like that. And I sort of said, well, I'll do the best I can. And as I turned, there was Will Gere standing there, who I had worked with before. Actually, I knew Will. And Will just smiled that grin, that little sly grin that he had, and said, welcome to the family, Mike.
Because Hobie has given the scout the address of the Waltons as to where they can find him. he announces to the family he's going to be one of the family again. This elicits various reactions from members of the family. And John Boy finds himself jealous of Hobie because he feels that Hobie just manipulates and consumes everyone's attention. And John Boy, I think, feels a little left out and a little put out by all this attention to Hobie and his braggadocio that he is always displaying. The scout does indeed show up, and they arrange for a little pitching trial to see Hobie's arm. And I believe we shot this sequence out in Franklin Canyon, where John refers to there being a baseball field just up the road. It's the only time I ever remember that being referred to, but here we are.
The tryout sequence where I had to pitch. I was a pretty good baseball player, but I was not a pitcher. I never had much of an arm, as they say. But I had watched some old footage of the old-time pitchers where they would do that silly wind-up. And so I said to Jack Shea, the director, can I do this wind-up? He said, well, let me see it. And he said, yeah, that's cool. And then we figured out a way. I said, I can't throw very fast. And, Hobie's supposed to be this great pitcher. And he said, well, are you accurate? I said, oh, yeah, I can put it right there. And Ralph was my catcher in that sequence, Ralph Waite. And so I said to Ralph, I said, I'm just going to wind up, throw it right down the middle, strikes. And supposedly in post-production, they can speed it up. And if you watch the show, they did a great job. It really looks like I'm firing bullets.
Hobie asks John to negotiate his contract, and John does a wonderful job and gets him triple what the scout was originally willing to pay. John and John Boy go with Hobie back to the county home for boys. Hobie does not want to go there, but he is eventually convinced to. Clearly he has mixed memories about his time there, but the boys are all very excited to see him.
My fear about the character of Hobie was that he was so big and that it would be overdone and wouldn't feel real or honest or truthful to the audience. The advantage I had was the beautiful writing that was always a part of the Waltons scheme. The character had numerous scenes where I was able to play him very vulnerable and quiet. There was a lovely scene with Olivia, with Michael Learned by a fireplace. Again, a warm, quiet scene with the father figure, with John Walton, with Ralph, where Hobie sort of admitted that life had been tough for him. So those scenes, and then some of the scenes after he's injured, I was able to, I think, convey a vulnerability and a likableness and an understanding to the audience that this young man was not just this jerk.
Showing off for the girls is something Hobie spends a lot of time doing. And in this case, as he is showing off, he is going to do something with this tree, swing off a branch or something, and instead the branch collapses. He falls, he injures his elbow, which ends his opportunity for a pitching career.
The other thing about playing the role was some of the dialogue was just fabulous. I mean, big as life and twice as handsome. I've used that the rest of my life. There was just some lovely dialogue. And I think the culmination scene that I had with John Boy, Richard Thomas, was some of the most exciting acting I've ever done, because Richard was so good. We rehearsed it sort of quietly at first, and first take, boy, he came at me, and I came right back. It was a good scene, and I think it again completed the Hobie Shanks journey in terms of the pain this kid was feeling. I mean, I could relate to the aspect of having a talent and wanting to share it and bring it to complete fruition, and having it taken away from you. like that. It's very, very hard, and I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Trying to get Hobie once again interested in moving forward with his life, the Waltons arranged to have a baseball game where the family will play against the boys from the county home. Hobie doesn't want to have anything to do with it. But ultimately, the sheriff ends up bringing Hobie by the game, and Hobie sees the Waltons playing the boys and finds himself drawn into it and coaching the boys. He decides to offer his services to the woman who runs the county home, and she takes him on as a sports director. So Hobie does indeed find a new path forward. I found it fun seeing us all playing baseball again. It reminded me of the time when the Waltons as a cast, the cast and crew, had a baseball team that would play against other TV shows like Star Trek or Happy Days, and that was a lot of fun. I see here, for the purposes of the show, I'm playing first base, which is interesting because Mary Ellen was supposed to be a catcher. Neither one were positions I ever played for real. I usually pitched or played short field. There's a little sequence where Grandma is attempting to explain the rules of baseball to a few other members of the community. Just priceless.
If the orphanage hits another run home and they hit some more strikes, then it's going to be all tied up. Oh, and when they do this, that means something.
That's my overall feelings about the character and the show. I went on to write for the episodes. That was in beginning my writing career, thanks to Earl Hamner and my father, John McGreevey. I always loved the Waltons, and I think the Braggart is a perfect example of what the Waltons gives to its audience, and it's a moral dilemma, and it usually gets not resolved, but there are answers given, and the characters grow and learn from the dilemma they've faced in the hour episode, and that's a wonderful thing.
A big thank you to Michael McGreevey for joining me and talking about his time on the Waltons. That's what I have for you on this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.